We're going to be in Mark 9, and we're going to be in Mark 9, 14 through 29 this morning. And the first thing I want to look at is the reality of our struggles. The reality of our struggles. In Mark 9, 14 through 18, it says, "And when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them, and scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed at him and greeted him. And he asked them, 'What are you arguing about with them?' And someone from the crowd answered him, 'Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams, and he grinds his teeth, and he becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able to.'" So the scene's set here. We just have returned down the mountain. Last week we talked about the transfiguration, and Jesus went up there with James and Peter and John. Now the three of those disciples and Jesus himself are coming down the mountain from that amazing moment. And as they come down into the valley at the bottom of the mountain, they're greeted with this crowd and the other disciples that didn't go with them. And this crowd is gathered around those disciples, and there's a clamor going on, and they're going on about something. And Jesus is like, "What's going on? What's going on?" And they said, "Well, this boy, he's possessed. He has a demon. And we asked your disciples to cast him out, and they could not." How many times have you been going through life and you'll have this mountaintop experience? Like, I just got this job, I just got this, or whatever. We closed on our house, we got engaged, or whatever it was, this mountaintop experience. And then a day or so later, something happens that you weren't expecting. Something physical, something financial, something relational, but something happens and you weren't expecting, and it feels like you went from mountaintop to valley. This is like the ultimate mountaintop moment, especially for like Peter and James and John, who got to witness the transfiguration. But they went and they saw the glory of God before them. They saw more of the plan unfold that God had for them. They were able to be a part of that, and they come down from the mountain to a big valley where just before they've been walking on cloud nine. And so they see this obstacle, these disciples, this demon and this boy, and they're facing these obstacles. They're facing this moment, this valley moment of where they kind of feel a little deflated. And when they do, we're reminded in Scripture from James what we're to do with these type of obstacles. In James 1, 2 through 4, it says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." This passage in James and in the encounter with the disciples, it reminds us that trials and struggles, they serve a purpose. They serve a purpose. I know it's hard because there's times where you're like, the other day, and I don't think she would mind me telling this story, but she won't hear it. But my daughter is at UCF, and her grades, they're going great. All the things that are going really, really good. But she had this project, and when she had this project, she was like, "I had so much on my plate, so Dad, I was," and I didn't know why I was hearing all the details, because I don't always hear all the details about everything that she does, but I was hearing a lot of details this day. And it was like, "So Dad, I had to go in and I had to rent the camera equipment that I was doing because we were shooting this video and everything, and I had to get the lights and I had to get the sound and I had to get all that." I said, "It sounds like church on Sunday morning." And she was telling me all this stuff, and she was like, "I'm doing all this stuff," and I went in and I was able to get it, and I was so proud of myself and everything, and then I went and did this. She's talking real fast, and she says, and aside from that, when I was so busy, Dad, I parked in this parking place, but there was no sign on it. There was just painting on the ground that said it was handicapped, so they wrote me a ticket. I was like, Well, yeah, I didn't need any of the other details, right? I was really feeling high for you there for a second. Like, I was so proud of you. You were doing so many adult things, and your grades are going good, and you're getting this project and everything, but you're just prepping me for this moment of telling me, okay, you need money. That's what you're wanting, right? Like, that's why I'm getting the details, is because you need money, because you parked in a handicap. If it's painted on the ground, then that's enough. You don't park there. But anyway, you go from this moment of pride, sometimes to a moment of escalated feelings, this mountaintop, to boom, you weren't expecting that. For us, as Christians, sitting here this morning, it's unrealistic for us to expect everyone to be like, oh, are you going to have a happy Thanksgiving, or are you going into this with the right mood and everything? It's unrealistic for us to expect that there's not obstacles, that there's not pains, that there's not things going on in other people's lives. Or it's unrealistic to suggest to others to dismiss that. Like that's not a reality. Like you can just casually put that on the shelf. That's not how life works. There really are things that happen in life. They really are painful sometimes to go through. But that doesn't mean that our thankfulness is gone. That doesn't mean that our closeness to God should be affected by that. If anything, it should draw us closer to God, and that's what we're looking at here. Those are not fake feelings. So let's look at the challenge of belief as we go on into this passage. In Mark 9, 19 through 24, it says, and he answered them, O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me. And they brought the boy to him, and when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy. And he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. And it has often cast him into the fire and into water to destroy him. But if you could do anything, have compassion on us and help us. And Jesus said to him, if you can, exclamation point there, all things are possible for one who believes. Immediately the child cried out and said, I believe, but help my unbelief. I believe, but help my unbelief. Do you know everybody believes? Everybody's got faith. Every single person in the world's got faith. A humanist, they have faith in humanity, right? An atheist, they have faith in themselves. An agnostic has faith that there's nothing. The evolutionists have faith in the evolution process and chance. A fascist, they put their faith in a master race. That's a word that we hear a lot lately as fascist. But everybody has faith in something. It's what you choose to put your faith in. We look at this story, and one of the things that stands out is that this guy brought his son to Jesus, like so many other encounters that we've experienced so far in Mark, right? A family member brings somebody that needs Jesus. They bring him to Jesus, and Jesus heals them. This guy brings his son to Jesus. But instead, Jesus is up here on the mountaintop, and so he sees Jesus' disciples. And he goes up to the disciples because they represent Jesus with the expectation. He's traveled from wherever he's traveled, whether it's the village that's right there over the shadow of that mountain or from miles and miles and miles away. We don't know, but we know that at some point, he's like, the only thing that's going to help my kid is God, is Jesus. And so I'm going to take him there, and I encounter some of his representatives, and they fail me. Doesn't that happen a lot in church? In church, people in the world, they'll hit their rock bottom, and for the first time, for whatever reason, they will try God. That's the way they would phrase it. I'll try it. I'll go to a church. I'll go do this because I know I need something. And then they encounter one of us, a representative of God, and that day, for whatever reason, we're operating Because sometimes this is what we do. We operate in our own strength. And we're operating in our own strength, as the disciples were this day that were in that valley. They were operating in their own strength. I know they were operating in their own strength. Well, back in Mark 6, I'm going to flip-flop the slides a little bit, Mary, I'm sorry. Or maybe I don't have it in mind. Can you put Mark 6 up on the screen? I don't have it in mind. Okay, well, in Mark 6, we know that prior to this, the disciples, these same disciples, they've been going around and they cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and healed them. They already have been in the process of casting out demons. The difference between what's going on in Mark 6 and what's going on in Mark 9 is in Mark 6, Jesus sent them out. He anointed them. He prayed over them. They prayed with him. They went out and they were full of the Holy Spirit. They had a gifting on them. They went out and they were casting out demons. They've done it once before. They've done it many times. It says plural, demons. So when they bring this boy to them, because they've done it before, the assumption is they can do it again. Because they're not going back to God. They're just, we've done that. How many times have we done that? How many times have we been guilty of that? I know I've been guilty of that. Just operating in my own strength. You ever engaged with somebody like in a conversation and you're like, I feel like I've done this before? Like, a lot of times as a pastor, for instance, you'll get asked to officiate a wedding. And I take that very serious. Not all pastors do, but I take it very serious because I'm standing up there and this union is something that's very sacred to God. So it's a very serious thing for me. And I just want to make sure that they have some inkling of what they're entering into, what God desires for their marriage to look like. And so I suggest that they do marriage counseling, and I will do it. But if they won't do that, then I won't officiate the wedding. I'll let somebody else do it or whatever. But it's important. And as I'm in these conversations, they'll start talking. And I've done it so many times that sometimes it's easy to think, well, I can just run remotely right here, right? Because what happens is when you're doing these counseling little sessions, people will start sharing stuff about it. You kind of have some of the same advice that you're sharing each time about communication and on and on, and I'm going down a rabbit trail here. But you have some of the same advice. But I tell you what's dangerous is because they're being vulnerable and they're opening up and they're sharing, when you enter into a situation where I've done this so many times, that I know I can answer their questions, I know what advice to give them, and you don't spend time to pray so that God might direct you and it might be His wisdom that pours out of you, then you're doing it in your own strength. You're doing it in your own strength. You're based off of what you feel like you've already done. You're operating in you and not in God. And that's where the disciples were at this moment. They were operating in them and not God. And I know that because we're going to get to that in just a minute. But I know that that's what was going on because Jesus says this is what's going on. And we do it too. And it's a horrible place to be in. And then when somebody comes in, like this man bringing his son into our family right here, into our church, we don't know who's hurting. We don't know. Some people come in here and they got some of the worst pain with the most beautiful smile on their face. You don't know what people are going through, but when they're at rock bottom and they're dealing with something and this is their straw and they're looking to engage God, and instead they find a representative that's operating in their own strength, they're sorely disappointed in what they thought God was going to do. And they walk out, and sometimes they're upset with God. And they ain't put two and two together that we're just people, especially the pastor, and we fail. Sometimes we say things that don't land the way they need to because we're not operating in His wisdom, we're operating in our own strength, and people get hurt. That's not what we need. In Luke 17, 15 through 19, it says, Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back praising God with a loud voice, and he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. Now he was a Samaritan, and then Jesus answered him, were not 10 of you cleansed? Where are the 9? Was not no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? And he said, rise and go, your faith has made you well. This is the encounter with the lepers, 10 lepers, and Jesus heals them, and only one returns. But the answer that Jesus gives is the same answer that he gives time and time again when he heals. Your faith has made you well. This belief system, I said that we all have faith. Where are you placing your faith? Well, the man came placing his faith in Jesus, but his faith was shaken because he ran into representatives of Jesus, and they weren't able to do it, and so his faith was shaken. And so Jesus asked him, if you believe, and he said, I believe, help me with my unbelief. Help me with my unbelief. When I heard that statement over and over this week as I was reading it, I thought about the play Neverland. We got to go watch it in some theater at some point in time. It was supposed to make me more classy, but it didn't work. But we watched it, and as we were there and we're watching this theater and everything, there's a part in there where Tinkerbell, she falls down and they pretend like she's dying and everything, and Peter Pan turns to all of us in the audience and he says, clap, if you believe, then she will live. And everybody claps. No, you got to clap louder. Tinkerbell will live, right? If it was just that easy, right? Like if that was what belief was, is that we could just clap. If we could do just some action, no matter what we really believe, because I didn't even believe it was Tinkerbell. But no matter what we believe, if we could just do some action and that was our belief, that would be so much easier. But that's not faith. That's not belief. And there are many, many times where we hit a dark place in our life, where we hit some obstacle, some storm, some giant that pops up in our life, where it hurts. It's hard. It's even hard to keep our head up high. And sometimes our faith, our belief, it's like a thimbleful, and we're just hanging on. I don't know if it's as encouraging to you as it is to me when I have this encounter with this man who's encountered other people that's made his faith a little shaky, and he cries out to Jesus, I believe, but help me with my unbelief. Proper place, right? Not enough clapping in the world, not enough action in the world is going to build our faith, but who can is God. And there's going to be times in our lives where we're at that place, at that dark moment, where it's nice to remember that we can cry out, God, help me. Help me right now. I need your encouragement. I need a strengthening in my faith. Help me with my unbelief. Hebrews 11:1 says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. That faith is found in God. It's not an action. It's not a wish. And even when we're talking about hope right there, it's not as if we're talking about, oh, I'm going to some magical genie and I'm like, please, God, provide. No, it's the assurance of things not seen. It's the assurance that God's going to work in those things. That's what faith is. That's what hope is. Is that when I go to God, I know that He's big enough to handle what I'm facing. I don't have to know how. I just know He is. Faith is not the absence of doubt, but the determination to trust God with it. It's not that you're not afraid. It's not that you're not upset. It's not that you don't understand. So many people think that when I come to God, I need to understand it myself. I need to know what the plan is as I'm praying it for God. I need to not have doubt in this. God's going to work through A, B, C, and that's going to equal D, and I know that, and I give it over to you. That's not how it works. You don't have to not doubt. You don't have to not know and be confused and hurt and everything else. You just have to be determined to let God deal with it. And let him have it. Matthew 17:20, he says, because of your little faith, for truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. God, help me with my faith. Determined to give it to him. And then the last part here says is a part about the necessity for prayer. In Mark 9:25-29, it says, and when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, you mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out. And the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, he is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, why could we not cast it out? And he said to them, this kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer. This type cannot be cast out by anything but prayer. When I was in seminary, I heard somebody speaking on this one time. And they made it almost sound like I was talking about the other week. That this was one of those mystical passages. That ending right there, in the James Version and in the New King James Version, it says it a little bit differently. It says that they cannot be driven out by anything but prayer and fasting. So there's the addition of the fasting there. And the mystical sense of it was that, okay, well, we just have to say a prayer. We have to be almost like what we would picture Hollywood's exorcism. We must say the right magical incantation. We must have the proper tool set and the proper setup to do this. And that's not what Jesus is talking about at all. If we come across a hard problem, in this case a demon, but if we come across anything that we really need God in, there's a special prayer, there's a special way, there's a special thing that we need to do, well, that would be way too dependent upon our action, wouldn't it? And is that how God works? Is God dependent upon our action before he works in our lives? Like you can't have certain things, like if you want certain privileges, if you want certain answers to prayer, then I need you to do this. That's not how God works. Those are deals, and God doesn't work through deals. It's like all of a sudden that you run across something, and if I speak it in original Greek, and I say the prayer just right, then bam, that demon's going to be gone. Or if I'm speaking Latin or anything like that, no, that's not what he's talking about. What he's saying is this kind cannot be out by anything but prayer, and if you want to, and fasting. What he's trying to say here is that they didn't go in equipped at all. They went in their own strength. What is prayer? It's communion with God. This problem, this obstacle can't be dealt with the absence of God. Can't be dealt with if you're not relying on God. Prayer is powerful. There's an account of prayer back in Daniel 10, and I'm only going to read a couple of verses of it, but Daniel 10:10-14, it says, and behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said to me, O Daniel, man, greatly loved, understand the words that I speak to you, and stand upright, for now I have been sent to you. And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up trembling. Then he said to me, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. For I was left there with the kings of Persia and came to make you understand what it is to happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision is for days to come. In this instance, there's so much that we learn through Daniel's prayer that God hears us when we speak to him. That there is spiritual warfare that occurs. that when we're trying to have God intercede on our behalf, that there's darkness and there's demonic presence that fights against what God wants to occur. And that sometimes that it takes persistence, it takes diligence, and continually to rely on God. Because what happens when we're communing with God, we're relying upon Him. I don't know if you know this or not, and it's not as important to this message as most everything else that's been spoken, but the name Reliance of this church is really centered upon that very, very truth, is that we have to put our places in our lives in a place of where we rely on God. Maybe you just thought it was just snappy, one of those just beautiful names. I want you to know that the very first suggestion that anybody had for this church was Anchor Church. And it wasn't as snappy. No, we didn't know what the church was going to be named. It came to a part where the name of the church came about through prayer. And through several of us, but not just me, but several of us knowing that if this was going to be what God wanted, that we would have to rely heavily on Him. But that's not just the church. That's us as individuals. Us as individuals, we have to rely upon God. That's what this prayer is. And Daniel, even though he wasn't getting the answer right where he wanted, he knew that he needed to continue to rely upon God. He knew that he needed to continually commune with God, to continually be lifting that up. Paul expresses this as well. He shows that prayer is not this last resort, but it's our lifeline. In Philippians 4:6-7, it says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Prayer is not a last resort. I get kind of upset. It's one of my triggers when people have started with this the strike against Christianity, I guess, if you will, when individuals with a podium in the public eye will say, well, we will be praying about that, and then people are like, prayers are not enough. Now, I understand what's being said. I believe that a lot of times, and especially in horrific circumstances where we have natural disasters and so on and so forth, what's being expressed is that they would like to see some action as well. Nothing wrong with that. I'd like to see action too. But don't ever say prayer is not enough. It's the most powerful thing that we have in our lives. If I go over, Daniel, and you have something that happens to your house and there's a tree that falls on it or whatever, and I go over and I help you all day long getting that tree off of your house, that's the very least that I can do compared to prayer. Prayer is powerful. It's God's vehicle. It doesn't have to be this way. It's not magical or anything else like that. God's not required to work through this manner, but it's His vehicle by which He ordained to work supernaturally in our lives. He desires for us to rely upon Him. He desires for us to commune with Him. He desires for us to come to Him in prayer. And by doing so, He works. When the disciples were unable to cast out this demon, it wasn't because they didn't have the tools. They knew what to do. They had done it before, but they didn't go in there leaning upon God. They didn't go in there empowered by God. Or the things that you're guilty of today that you're doing that you're not leaning upon God. That you're not spending with Him, relying on Him. Today, if that is the case, then that's what needs to be changed. We have to make prayer a central part of our life. You don't know this because my wife is probably doing an amazing job, but man, scriptures have changed a lot today, and I'm causing her to jump all around. In Ephesians 6:18, it says, praying at all times in the Spirit with all prayer and supplication. To that end, keep alert with all perseverance, making supplication for all the saints. Prayer is our lifeline. It should be the very first thing that we do. It should be in every breath that we take. Praying at all times. When we're praying at all times, then we're walking in our own strength. Go back to this analogy of giving people advice, even in something like marriage counseling or whatever. There are so many times where I will say something and I'm sarcastic, I'm human, I'm whatever, and I'll say something and it's taken the wrong way. When I go in there directly from prayer, God protects those conversations. And it's very hard to explain how, but it's Him that starts speaking into that. It's Him that's aware. It happens in every stage, every particle of my life. The more that I add Him in, the more that I rely upon Him. When Paul said in the other passage in Philippians that everything by prayer, go into everything by prayer through supplication and thanksgiving, the way that we're more aware of God is thanksgiving. And so I'm aware of God. When I go to prayer, I'm always thankful. I always start my prayers off with thankfulness. I always start off with not, this is what I need, or can you help me with this? I start off with starting to name things that I know that He's already done. And then asking for His forgiveness for not being aware of all the other things that He's doing, because He's constantly at work in my life. But I start with thanksgiving, and it draws me closer to Him. And that's what I'm encouraging us from this passage to do, to draw closer to Him this week. I don't know what's going on in your life. Tyndall, I don't have a clue what's going on at your home. You could have pipes leaking for all I know. And y'all may have to eat your Thanksgiving meal in an inflatable buoy. I don't know. But if you do, there's a billion things that you could be thankful for. That doesn't mean the obstacle doesn't exist, but there's a billion things that you can be thankful for, because God's constantly at work in our lives. Lean into Him this Thanksgiving. And then let your Christmas season start off well. This morning I'm going to have Ricky come up. Maybe there's something in your life. Maybe there's some doubt in your life. There's something that's happened and it's affected you and it's hard and you don't know how you're going to get through it and you don't know why God hadn't answered that prayer. You don't know what's going on. This would be a good time to leave that doubt at the altar this morning. Maybe there's something going on in your life that you know is keeping you from drawing even closer to God for having that thankful heart. This morning, let's deal with that. Let's stand this morning.